Hello, I'm Amora Lukisan, and today I'll be telling you a story about the author and the audience. I've decided to present my work in this manner to control what's going on a bit better, but this also means I can't hear you for a bit, so please hold all your questions until the end of the presentation, and I promise to answer them all to the best of my abilities. So, we are here to explore the relationship of the author, also known as the storyteller, and the audience, along with the societal impact it has. We'll be doing this by drawing from the knowledge in the psychology and history of narratology. At any given moment, all over the world, hundreds of people will be engaged in what is one of the most familiar of all forms of human activity. In one way or another, they will have their attention focused on mental images which they call a story. So, what is narratology? Narratology is the academic study of narrative in itself. In conjunction, narrative theory is the active query. The psychological aspect of narratology comes in the form of understanding child development, how people cope with change, and how it is used in everyday life. In places such as Africa, narrative is said to be, and I quote, as old as human habitation on the continent. Something that the theory of evolution suggests is a pretty long time. So, let's start from the very beginning. A very good place to start. How did narrative come to be? Routledge's research articles suggest China's history with narrative, quote, unfolded in a manner opposite of its counterpart in the West, unquote, beginning with literary works rather than oral storytelling. Narrative started out as a tool to comprehend and communicate what is called li, also known as the righteousness of earth, and the proper action of mankind. As literature in China was based on wen, meaning pattern, and dao, meaning way. So the general concept was that every story has already been written. Every pattern and path has already been determined, and we are merely flowing upon the river of time deciding which paths to take. In Japanese culture, much of the cultural division in its narrative is derived from whether it is supernatural or historical, and much of the literature is embedded in the idea of time and rhythms. This can be seen in the difference of modern-day manga in comparison to Western comics, in which comics usually use each panel to illustrate each beat of the story, whereas manga can often have multiple panels illustrating a single moment in time in which the narrative has paused. You could even say that this concept can be found complementing the minimalist art style that you often find around Japanese culture. From the idea of treasuring what you have in the moment to the way they write poems in 3 simple and concise lines. Precision and the passage of time. A popular Japanese theory that thrives off of this concept comes from the great No dramatist Zimi, 1364 to 1443. Who made a narrative story structure purely around the basis of pacing, beginning at a slow and more rhythmic pace, building tension, and then ending it with a bang, per se. This sense of fulfillment, Zemi explains, comes about precisely through the communication of aware, which supposedly means creating empathy through pity. Interestingly enough, this coincides with Rasatwani, an Indian narrative theory about the idea of rasa, meaning empathic emotion, and dvani, meaning suggestion, and the integration of the emotions of the reader and the character that the reader is following through their story. A big part of storytelling is being able to create a connection between the audience and the story that the author is trying to convey, which requires influencing emotion and empathy, 2 of the ways humans connect with each other. Conflict is human nature. Mirroring the action of human interaction, a core part of the Razatwani theory is connection. Meanwhile, the Middle Eastern narrative was apparently, quote, deeply influenced by Plato and Aristotle, which led to the development of the ethical impact of literature, unquote, which is also a look into the connections human nature makes through empathy and emotions. This being the third historical theory based around how we as humans interact with the world and create empathy suggests the beginning of a pattern. But where Razatwani focuses on how to make the audience empathize with the narrative, this theory is more akin to the ethical turn, where they take that one step further and look at how that can then be used to change your opinion on real-world topics, bringing fictional impact back into reality. These Arabic theorists were interested in how stories could cultivate emotions and which ones mainly to be used to uphold Islamic legal practices, partially drawing on Aristotle's account of pity and fear, which can often transition into empathy. This can be seen especially through characters who go through immense pain and suffering in roughly the Aristotelian sense, due to a mistake that they have made that is not so big that they are portrayed as bad people, but big enough that they end up going through something bad, normally with some kind of moral at the end to loop it all around. But what of the media and the entertainment industry that uses narrative in our modern age of the early 21st century? Nowadays, stories are told through a number of mediums, such as movies, shows, games, stage performances, YouTube videos, books, and more. We've expanded on how to go about bringing our stories to life. We can now do it through live action, animation, writing, music, etc., not to mention all the story genres. We have so many variables now that it would literally be impossible to sort through even a fraction of it. So let's focus on how that massive world has shifted our society. A study on child development shows that although children tend to base their logic on real-world events rather than what is on TV, if what is happening on TV happens to look realistic enough, then it is likely to begin swaying their judgment towards what they are seeing on TV, from lifelong aspirations to judgment calls in their everyday lives. And the internet has changed the game when it comes to this. There are more amateurs, behind-the-scenes shots, and real stories than ever. The need to understand what the development of our minds require and how entertainment can make or break that is more important than ever, because a child's mind is being introduced to more realistic depictions of entertainment every day. Within animation specifically, there are more storytime animators making animatic-like animations talking about a topic or story. Like what I'm doing here. Using simple-looking ways to make a connection to the audience whilst talking about topics that relate to the audience, much like the Indian narrative theory Razatwani. YouTubers have gained the trust and respect of millions of people by bringing about empathic emotions with suggestions of relatability. And that right there has formed a virtual space for new cultures to cultivate and grow. The narrative theories we have learned about throughout history have now become a cornerstone to this new era of non-geographically based cultures. So, let's recap. Narrative was brought about in an attempt to comprehend and interact with our reality. Narrative has been shown to help us teach lessons, share experiences, explain complex topics, express ourselves, and is a way to help us remember and build cultures. Two more quotes from Harman et al. Theorists have suggested that people use narratives as a vehicle for thought. In other words, we use it as a way to communicate. Also, the diversity of psychological approaches to narrative mirrors the diversity within the field of psychology itself. Thereby, cognitive and creationary methods of interacting with story and narrative have become a key factor in the mechanisms of our nervous system's ability to translate the information that it receives. If this is how we perceive the world, Does it not stand to reason that the topic holds weight in how our society functions? In addition to everything that has been previously mentioned, our legal system is dictated by narrative as well. We use an adversarial tactic of having two people stand in court to profess their side of what happened, suggesting what consequences should happen due to those events, whilst mediating factors analyze the narratives to come to a decision. In conclusion, the relationship of the author and the audience is the essence of narrative, a concept born of a desire to communicate, which is a fundamental aspect of a functioning society, making it one of the key components in understanding how our society functions in order to improve upon it. But that's just a theory, a narrative theory. Thanks for listening.